title of the Shiur this evening is Comprehending the Incomprehensible. And of course, it's the month of Nisan. And the month of Nisan has a very special quality because the Chazal, our sages, have already told us in the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, B'Nisan Nigalu Aviseinu. It was the month of Nisan that the Jewish people redeemed from Mitzrayim. B'Nisan Hasidin Lihigoyim. Our history, state our sages, was initiated with the act of redemption in the month of Nisan, of course, from Mitzrayim, and it will come to its finale. The Jewish history will come to its finale with the ultimate redemption in the same month of Nisan, when Mashiach Tzidkenu will appear, and the Moloch, it's theirs, Hashem Kaman Li'am Nechosim. Everybody will recognize, be aware of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we will all become wise and very understanding people. It will be a tremendous revelation of the greatness, grandeur, majesty of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, the Chazal also were interested exactly what precipitated the original Gula from Mitzrayim. And in Vayikra Rabbah, the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah, Perek Lamed Beis, the 32nd chapter, Sif Hey, Rav Huna Amar B'Shem Bal Kapore, B'Shvil Daled Dvorim Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim, Shelo Shonu Eshmom, Ves L'Shoinom, V'Yomu Loshen Hore, V'Nimtza B'Neihem, Echot Poretz Be'ervo. That the Jewish people, be'emes, merited the Geula. It wasn't gratuitous, although there's no question about it. We could assume that the Jewish people indeed sunk to very, very low madregas against their will, involuntarily subjugated with brutality and cruelty, but that's not the fact. Chazal state, the Ruach Kodsham, that the Jewish people maintained the Jewish identity in the dark, grisly night of affliction in the crucible of Mitzrayim. They did not change their names. Reuven, say the Chazal also in the Medrash Rabbah at the beginning of Sefer Shmois, did not change his name to Rufus, and Shimon stayed Shimon, and Levi stayed Shimon. So in other words, they had Jewish names, and having a Jewish name is part of the Jewish identity, handed down by way of tradition from Avoseinu HaKadoshim, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, handed down a tradition to maintain the Jewish names, which they did. And they spoke the language that Jews speak, so they were unique in that as well. And this differentiated them from all the other nations that existed at the time. And moreover, there was no evil speech that the Jewish people spoke. No derogatory comments about their fellow man. Nobody demeaned, belittled this fellow man. Nobody spoke in a way that somehow or other it would seem that he's even minimally critical of his fellow man. In other words, the entire Shmiras HaLashon of the Chofetz Chaim, with all of its details, was achieved by the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. But moreover, the Torah has told us testimony. It's testimony of the Torah that the most immoral place in the world is Mitzrayim. The Torah calls Mitzrayim Erbas Haaretz. The immorality is ingrained in the land. In other words, the environment and the atmosphere is so strong that it leads to immorality. And the Chazal say, "Lo nimtza b'neihem," there was only one act of immorality that was recorded, mind-boggling, in 210 years of inhuman subjugation to the Mitzrayim. One case, and that was also under extenuating circumstances. And of course, there's greatness in not being ethical and moral when it's easy, but rather when forces are against us and it involves sacrifice and struggle, that a person and a community and a nation achieves greatness. And the Jewish people, the MS, achieved that greatness in Mitzrayim. So that's why they maintained their Jewish identity. Of course, we're speaking about a time before there was a Matan Torah. Without a Torah, the only Torah they had was the tradition that Avosseinu HaKadoshim Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov passed down from generation to generation. And indeed, they reached very lofty, if not dizzying heights. So therefore, we would assume that that was enough to warrant the redemption. However, when we look at Parashas Boy, which we read last week, which is also called Parashas HaChodesh, so we see that the preponderance of the verses speak about Korban Pesach. Very little is mentioned about matzah. Chometz is mentioned in a few verses. Matzah is mentioned in one verse, but mostly we're involved in all the details of the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice that the Jewish people sacrificed in Mitzrayim. There was no Beis HaMikdash, and Mitzrayim is unique that they had a sacrifice, a Korban Pesach. That's the name, that's the nomenclature. It's a Chayvas Yochid, the personal obligation for all subsequent generations. And the first Korban Pesach was sacrificed in Mitzrayim. As we said, most of the Psukim deal with the sacrificial order. And we all know the Haggadah Shel Pesach, when we speak about the Mishnah of Rabban Gamliel, so Rabban Gamliel said, Kol shelo shloisha dvarim elu b'Pesach liyot yedei chayvasai. Then Pesach Matzu Umarut, Rabban Gamliel said, today, if we do not speak about the three central mitzvahs of the night of Pesach, which in the times of the Beis HaMikdash were Pesach, Matzah, Umoro, in the Hilchas Maisa, in activities that we have to engage in, aside from Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he's not Yotzei, according to many commentators, even Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, it's not a complete fulfillment of relating the story of the Exodus. You have to mention these three mitzvahs specifically, and also the reasons behind these three mitzvahs. So, of course, the question that all the commentators ask, what was the reason for Korban Pesach? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in His great mercy, passed over Jewish homes. When He inflicted Makas Bechoros, the plague to kill the firstborn of the Egyptians. And then we have matzah. What's the reason for matzah? This is the order that's mentioned in the Haggadah. Is because Klal Yisrael very hastily had to leave Mitzrayim and they didn't have proper time to bake the wafers. And then last but not least, we have, of course, Mohol. And what is Mohol? What does that commemorate? They made our lives bitter with back-breaking work afflictions, etc. So, of course, what preceded? In other words, if we look at it from a chronological, historical point of view, so we should say, first and foremost, Murr, al Shumma. What's the purpose of our commemoration when we eat Murr by the Seder? So obviously, we're not going in a chronological, historical order, because Murr took place first, and then we had Korban Pesach, and then we had Matzah. According to the Gemara, that says that the basic, fundamental redemption and salvation was during the day of Tesvav, of the 15th of Nisan, and of course, the Korban Pesach was consumed at nighttime. So what exactly is the order? The order is a very simple order, not we're commemorating the historical events chronologically, but we're emphasizing the hierarchy of the mitzvahs. And the most central mitzvah is Korban Pesach. Afterwards, we have Matzah, which is also a separate independent mitzvah unto itself. It also applies today when there is no Korban Pesach. And we have Maror, which Maror is not a separate independent mitzvah. That's why it's number 3. Maror, basically, like the Achronim taught us, to use the proper nomenclature, is Hechsheira de Pischa. If there's no Korban Pesach, there's no Maror. There's no separate independent mitzvah of Maror. Even in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, Maror was always found in the company of the Korban Pesach. Matzah was also consumed together with the Korban Pesach. Was also a very important component part of the mitzvah of sacrificing and eating the Korban Pesach. Nevertheless, Matzah has a special verse which made it into a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, and therefore it applies today. So in other words, today we only have 2 mitzvahs min haTorah, biblically mandated, that's Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matzah. When the Beis HaMikdash was Kayom, before it was destroyed, so we also had Korban Pesach. That was the 3rd mitzvah min haTorah. But we mentioned a moment ago that Parshas Bo, Perek Yud Beis, the 12th chapter of Shemos, deals almost exclusively with a focus of attention on Korban Pesach. And we have a very interesting halacha that the Mishnah in Tzadikei Pesachim points out that there are distinctions and differences between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Deches. And one of them, of course, is what's mentioned in the Pasuk. Pesach Mitzrayim, on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, v'yikul lachem, you have to take a Korban Pesach. In other words, the mitzvah of Pesach Mitzrayim was to purchase it on the 10th of Nisan. And the Mishnah points out, for all subsequent Korban Pesach, you can actually purchase the Korban one moment before the time to sacrifice it, which is Yudalid, Beinu Arbayim Yudalid, the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. Even 1 second. So, of course, the question naturally arises, why? So, Rashi does state that every Korban Kavua, every set Korban, whether it be an individual obligation or a community obligation, has to be examined, inspected. It should not have any defects, because every Korban has to be sacrificed in a perfect state. But that applies l'doros as well. And it could be examined, inspected by the royal side, the shepherd who has it. So he's believed to say that this does not have a muma, examined it for 4 days. Or somebody else from the outside can every morning examine it. Make a siman that this is the carbon that he wants to purchase. If he doesn't trust the raya, that'll be adequate. So that can't be the reason. So Rashi brings down the famous medrash of Ramasya ben Chorosh, who said, "Ve'ever alaya ve'erech, hinei itech eiz doidim." HaKadosh Baruch Hu also passed by Mitzrayim, and he saw that the time to consummate his love for the Jewish people has arrived. The time has come for salvation. 210 years of bitter and cruel and brutal servitude have come to an end. And all of a sudden we are shocked to see the words of Ramasya ben Chavash, "V'lo hoya biyada mitzvahs lehisasek b'hem kidei sheyigolu shenemevad ovaim ve'elyo." But they didn't have it. They didn't have mitzvahs that they should occupy themselves at the time of the redemption, as the pasuk says that they unfortunately were not totally covered insofar as their spiritual, metaphysical nakedness is concerned with mitzvahs. So therefore, Kadosh Baruch gave him two mitzvahs Pesach and mitzvahs Milah, and they circumcised themselves that evening. The question, Milah is not ritually accepted, it's not kosher balayla. A question, we won't delve into that now. And of course, we do not understand. It's shocking to read such a statement. They had in their hands, they did not have in their hands mitzvahs to preoccupy themselves with them in order that they should warrant the redemption. And of course, the question naturally arises. They had schuyas of 210 years. They already have all the previous schuyas that we mentioned before of Dalet Dvarim. So why were additional schuyas required for the actual Gula? True, the Dalet Dvarim are passivity. They're accomplished and achieved by being passive. And over here we had for the first time two mitzvahs, maisias, activities that you have to do, biyodayim. So perhaps we would say that a mitzvah saseh is superior to mitzvahs lo saseh. That perhaps would be a reason. So it would be insufficient, the Dalet Dvarim. But that is not necessarily a correct answer. We have to understand that, because to constantly, day in, day out, year in and year out, maintain a Jewish identity with no act of treason for one occasion, no lashon hara, absolutely, total morality. So we do not understand why these one-timely mitzvahs should be superior to the Dalet Dvarim, even though they were passive, but nevertheless they emanated from a tremendous yiras shamayim, a tremendous dedication, devotion, unqualified, a commitment of each person's inner world to the tradition of the Jewish people. There was no Torah, we have to remember. This was their Yiddishkeit, their Jewishness. Difficult to understand. As we mentioned a moment ago, it's very difficult, almost a shock to see this. So we have to try to understand exactly what Ramasya ben Chorosh means. He quotes the psukim in Yecheskel, and there's no doubt about that the Navi said, the prophet said about Aram Be'eria, you don't have enough metaphysical covering to cover parts that are revealed. It's a metaphor, so we have to try to understand it. The second question, I do not want to burden anybody with being too pedantic, is a question the Mefarshim asked. What was the question of Rav Masya ben Charash? The question was, why is Pesach Mitzrayim different than Pesach Doiros? Why was there a special requirement to purchase? How they purchased it, we're not aware of, but to purchase the set, the lamb, which will be designated and ascribed to be the carbon on the 10th of the month. It's only a din in Pesach Mitzrayim. Pesach Doiros doesn't have it. So that was his question. He didn't answer the question because his answer was an answer which would be a proper answer if the question would be, with what schuyas did Klal Yisrael have to be redeemed? With what were they zeichet to the Gula? What did they do, insofar as they're concerned, to merit the redemption and salvation? So we have a very, very good answer to that question. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave them two mitzvahs to preoccupy themselves, Dam Milo and Dam Pesach. And as such, they merited. That was not the question. So what's the answer? What's the question? We don't know. It's incommensurate. Doesn't follow. Question was, why is Pesach Mitzrayim, as far as the Korban Pesach concerned, different? The answer, the Chure, is what we spoke about at the beginning in the title of the Shiur. Comprehending the incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible to us. We do not understand. Nevertheless, we see something which is remarkable insofar as the approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to the Jewish people. And this is quite an important lesson for us. We all know that the 10th of Nisan in Mitzrayim was on Shabbos. It coincided with Shabbos. And we also know, like the Torah points out, when we say Shabbos morning in Shachris, Yismach Moshe v'matnas kalkoi, what does Moshe Rabbeinu have to do to Shabbos? So the Torah brings down the Medrash that Paro, like Napoleon, worked the people 7 days a week. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was still in the palace of Paro, convinced Paro to give them 1 day of rest. And the reason he gave was very simple, because the affliction will be much stronger the subsequent week. So he asked him, what day should that be? Told him Shabbos. So it coincided with Shabbos. And Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely happy that he was able to fathom, due to his own metaphysical, spiritual intuition, what day HaKadosh Baruch Hu will select to be the day of rest for the Jewish people. And on that day, the Torah points out, the Jewish people celebrated Shabbos. It was not a regular day of rest. It wasn't parallel, let's say, to America that has a day off on Sunday. Chas v'shalom. What did they do? So they went to the Batei Knesiyos and Batei Midrashos. They set aside certain buildings to have a get-together, to have a communal get-together, and read Parshiyos of Bereshis, which were brought down to Mitzrayim, in order to inspire them to continually have the faith that one day there'll be a redemption. So on Shabbos, basically, the order of the day was for them, for the men, to be in Botei Knesiyos and Botei Midrashos, but not to go to the marketplace. So there was an observance of Shabbos as a special day. It was not a day where you'll see Jewish people in the marketplace. It was a spiritual experience. They experienced it. And all of a sudden, a directive came from Moshe Rabbeinu that on the 10th day of Nisan, which happened to coincide with Shabbos, everybody now will go to the marketplace and purchase from the Mitzrayim a lamb, and they'll ask, what do you want a lamb for? And they're going to answer, like the Torah says, Mitzvahs Hashem Aleinu. We have a mitzvah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was mandated to us to slaughter this lamb and afterwards roast him, that the odor should go out of Mitzrayim, and through that we will nullify and negate the Avodah Zarah of the Mitzrayim. They served, their idol that they served was the lamb. This is related to us in the Torah Shulchan Aruch. And of course, we know that the 10th of Nisan was Shabbos. Nevertheless, all the commentators on the Torah asked the question, why was the 10th of Nisan not singled out to be Shabbos HaGadol? After all the holidays are linked up not with the day of the historical event that took place, but on the contrary, what exactly was the determining factor? The date of the month. So therefore, Yetzias Mitzrayim was on a Thursday. That was Tezvav, the 15th of the month. Shabbos HaGadol, right? This nest, we'll soon see, when the Jewish people went and fulfilled the directive of buying a carbon Pesach, was on Shabbos, but we don't celebrate Pesach on Thursday. We celebrate on the day of the week. So the question, of course, is why did we not commemorate Shabbos HaGadol? We'll soon see what there was to commemorate on the 10th of the month. So there's many answers. We would like to suggest different answers. What happened on that day? It was Shabbos HaGadol. It was a great Shabbos. Gadol also means chesed, because chesed is an expansion. When we say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is invested greatness, we mean chesed, we mean kindness. So it was a Shabbos that was a kind Shabbos. It was a kind Shabbos of the Jewish people, because when the Jewish people told over the shepherds of Mitzrayim that they're going to slaughter the lamb, which is the getch, the Avodah Zarah of the Mitzrayim, it's their idol that they serve. So each of the Mitzrayim was overcome with the anger, wanted to pull out a sword and kill the Jew. Naturally, why should he have to suffer and see that his idol is being demeaned by, of all people, the Jewish people that are slaves in Mitzrayim? A nest took place and he became impotent. Impotent, totally. Chazal call it Shinayim Keyos. His teeth were paralyzed. His hands were paralyzed. Shinayim Keyos is a metaphor to say there was a paralysis. He was grinding his teeth. He wanted to say something. He wanted to do something to protect the dignity of his idol, and he was incapable. So we have an unbelievable scenario, very, very difficult to even picture. 600,000 people went out on Shabbos, perhaps more, to purchase a set, and each one went to Mitzvahs Hashem, and he was ready to be Moshe Nefesh. He risked his life. Ein Simchan ala Nes. We do not rely on miracles. Klal Yisrael did not ask Moshe Rabbeinu, Hayitochen, how can a Kadosh Baruch Hu ask this of us? You yourself, Moshe Rabbeinu, a while back, when you were in a dialogue, negotiations with Paroi, because you wanted us to leave Mitzrayim for 3 days and undergo an order of sacrifices to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Paroi said, why don't you sacrifice to God, your God here in Mitzrayim? So he said, are you normal? If we were to slaughter a sheep, a lamb, the Mitzrayim will kill us. So Paroi said, I have an eitzah, I have good advice for you. We'll get you protection from the police and from the army. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, with all the protection the Jewish people will have, even if it's a royal edict, Mitzrayim will kill us. And Paroi understood it. So the Jewish people firsthand realized that they were in mortal danger. After so many years of subhuman treatment, now it's the finale of Shibud Mitzrayim, they have to risk their lives. And it was a risk, not 50-50, but 99 against 1% that they'll come out alive. And they already had a proof as clear as the sun that this is going to take place, and their proof was Paroi himself who agreed with Moshe. So the answer to the last question is a simple answer now. Had it not been Shabbos, had it been a regular day of the week, so the Mitzrayim would have simply thought that the Jewish people are trying to scorn and ridicule them. They never would have thought that there's a seriousness in what they said. They're taunting them, no more than that. Because then after 210 years, they realized, all the Egyptians realized that Jewish people don't have suicidal tendencies. It cannot be true that the Jewish people are going to undertake a sacrificial order. Because if they would, we would kill them, murder them. So therefore, if it would be on Shabbos, so Shabbos added a strain of seriousness to what they said. Because on Shabbos, they would never go out in the marketplace. They would never do business on Shabbos. There was a quasi-Shmira Shabbos that the Jewish people had undertaken. It wasn't a regular day of the week. It was unusual. It was quite unique. It was metaphysical more than physical. And yet on Shabbos, they went out, and what did they do? They were ready to sacrifice their lives to be Mekayim, the directive of HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe on the 10th day on Shabbos, v'yikol lamb, sell the base over, sell a boy, take a lamb for the sacrifice. So therefore, of all the moyadim, Shabbos HaGadol is different. Why is it different? Very simple. Because it was Shabbos itself that brought about the danger. The mortal danger was created because it was Shabbos. So therefore, it does not relate to the date of the calendar. Yetzias Mitzrayim has no link whatsoever to Thursday. Yetzias Mitzrayim, the mass exodus of Jewish people from Egypt, could have been on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, happened to be on Thursday. But Thursday was not a cause for Yetzias Mitzrayim. Shabbos was a cause, a sibur, for the sakana that befell the Jewish people. And the Jewish people were well aware of the danger, a mortal danger. Never said a word, no complaint, no inquiry. They understood very well that they cannot comprehend the incomprehensible. So at this juncture, we have an answer to the original question. Now we understand that Masya ben Charish's question and answer in a very different light. Of course, the Jewish people achieved tremendous pnimius halev in their sojourn in Mitzrayim. As we mentioned a moment ago, to be a moral man under circumstances, conditions, and forces that work against you is very difficult. There was no great manifestation of the mercy and kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu during those years. There was a Hester Panim. And now, the Jewish people were ready to sacrifice. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to tell us that in order for the Jewish people to have a salvation and a redemption, it's not enough. It's simply not enough maintaining a Jewish identity, despite the fact that that's very difficult. You need mesirus nefesh. You have to be willing to lose everything, including your life, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And with that act of mesirus nefesh, so the Korban Pesach of Mitzrayim was crowned with a crown of mesirus nefesh, of willing to risk one's life in order to fulfill HaKadosh Baruch Hu's request. So in Pesach Doiris, for all subsequent years where the Jewish people bought a Korban Pesach, the purchase is a vehicle. There's no mitzvah involved in the purchase. As we mentioned a moment ago, you can purchase it 5 minutes before you sacrifice it. There's no mitzvah. It's not a din in the Korban Pesach itself. It's no more a vehicle, a means to an end, which is having a Korban Pesach. And after you bought it, so now you have the first din, the first halacha of Korban Pesach. You have to sanctify it l'shem shamayim, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then you have to do the sacrificial order. That's Pesach Mitzrayim. It's different. For Pesach Davis, the Korban Pesach is just another mitzvah. For Pesach Mitzrayim, the lekicha, the purchasing on Yud, was an inherent din. It was not extrinsic to the din of Korban Pesach, but it was intrinsic because it was not just another mitzvah. It was a mitzvah that had to be crowned, had to be adorned with a special crown and adornment of Mesiras Nefesh. It was not a din chitzayni, but it was a din in the etzem, in the essence of the Korban Pesach. And that was the limud that the Jewish people have to be willing to give everything away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that will facilitate the Geula. As we mentioned at the beginning, we cannot comprehend the incomprehensible. But that is what our religion and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires of us. And if He requires it of us, we are capable of reaching that. Because the Nishmas Yisrael is such a great neshama, now we can reach the unreachable without being able to fathom it. Avraham Avinu came into our history with many, many different aspects of his personality. But what do we remember? What do we recite every day? That is Akedas Yitzchak, sacrifice. We cannot comprehend the incomprehensible. Why should Avraham Avinu have to sacrifice his only son? And that's the future of the great institution of Judaism which Avraham Avinu is going to build. We cannot comprehend the incomprehensible. But what do we comprehend? The Jewish people will be a great nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it will require tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. And that's the answer. Why? By Pesach Mitzrayim was it necessary to bring a Korban Pesach through an act of purchasing it on the 10th of the month? Answer is because we were not completely covered metaphysically. We had a Jewish identity, and we had a Pnimius Alev, and we reached dizzying heights, but we did not, as of yet, express that we're willing to give everything away for HaKadosh Baruch Hu if we're required to do so. A total commitment, and that took place on Shabbos HaGadol. It's a great Shabbos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's Beichen Levavos, Yedei Machshavos, He knows our thoughts. He feels the impulses of our heart. Was made that we deserved the Geula because it was an act of total integrity, unassailable integrity on the part of the Jewish people. And indeed, they reached the heights of being the generation that in another 7 weeks will be Mekabel the Torah, and they will be able to perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a brief moment when all the 7 firmaments were opened. And this is what we have to realize. And that is why the Korban Pesach is central to the entire section that deals with Passover. Matzah is important, Yetzias Mitzrayim is important, but this is all, so to speak, transmitted to us in a very brief, concise, precise way. 1 or 2 psukim, not Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is the central pillar of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's also a central pillar of Judaism. And in Nisan, we should all realize that this is the time to do whatever we can with Mesiras Nefesh. Not to complain about cleaning the house. It's difficult, it's laborious, it's arduous. Whatever you do, l'shem mitzvah, and whatever Mesiras Nefesh you have, even though it's not risking your life, but it's difficult, it's sacrificial, it comes with great physical pain, so that makes the mitzvah all the more worthy, and it crowns the mitzvah with a type of Mesiras Nefesh. This is the month that we have going for us to ultimately be Zoicha in the finale of Jewish history, and with God's help, if we all muster all the keiches that we have, we shall be able to accomplish it, and we should all see b'nissen asidim v'yigoyel. Amen. King Yasasha.